Kia ora koutou, māku e karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te taonga. Kia mā kina kina ki ruta, kia mā taratara ki tau. E hi aki ana te atakura. He teo, he huka, he hauhu. Tihei Mauriwa. Kia ora and welcome to our winter solstice edition of Creative Mornings. It is the longest night, the shortest day, and you've made it halfway through the year, so well done everyone. And you got up really early, it was really cold, so well done. Welcome to Creative Mornings. Who's not been here before? Woo! That's incredible! I'm so happy to see it. You got it! Amazing. Welcome! Keep coming back. We do a different speaker every month, have a different speaker every month for a different theme every month, and we don't necessarily have a different breakfast, but we always have breakfast, so that's the key point here. So the theme this month, and this is a global theme, so every chapter around the world is adhering to this theme, is pattern. I am going to slip over here because I did not put this on my phone to read you quickly. Pattern. So recognizing, forming and breaking patterns are core components of creativity. Visuals, sounds, movements and the passage of time, all from patterns that shape our existence and our work. Our Shania chapter's selection of this theme was inspired by the art from Kola, which features patterns of dots that are encircled or connected by straight and curved lines. Traditionally created by women, our Shania chapter shared that these beautiful designs are often created by family members and neighbours as our communal activity. Connections between people from patterns in our lives. Which patterns in your relationships, work and habits are worth repeating? Which ones should be changed? What new patterns do you want to create? So the connections that we make at these events are fantastic. I've already seen some happen already today live, so that was pretty special to see. And as always, a big shout out to all of our sponsors. So 257 for this beautiful space that they allow us to use every month. We've got Arthur on photography today. Thank you so much, Arthur. We'll be sharing those photos probably later in the month or early next month. We've got Andy from Hype Entertainment today, who's videoing the event, so you'll be able to check back or share with friends who miss it. Ethan's not here today, but he often helps out with the videography as well. 6 Barrel Soda for our lovely speaker gift, remind me later. Libertine Teas for the beautiful tea, Coffee Supreme to keep you caffeinated, All Good Oat Milk, and Colourcraft for the labels, which reminds me I need to get some more printed. Bad Baker for the cookies, and 40 Thieves for peanut butter. And then we've got a special sponsors for this month. All Good also sent us a big box of bananas. We've got Raglan Food Co for the delicious coconut yogurt, dairy-free and vegan. Lucy's Seeds and Things. So Lucy is a regular attendee of Creative Mornings. I tried to see how many you have attended. I think it was like 40. It's getting up there, yeah. Wow. Yeah, because when you register, it tracks it. But Lucy sells at markets and at events, or shares her foods at events. And she creates delicious seed toppers and the seed bites. I like the chocolate ones. And then we actually got some wonderful extra fruit from New World across the road. So that was very nice. And of course, shout out to our amazing volunteers. They make your breakfast, they make your coffee, they help me set up all these chairs. They do social media and all sorts of things throughout the month as well. So big shout out to them, big round of applause to the volunteers. Follow us on social media, share our things on social media. We are on Instagram, X, formerly known as Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn, and we've just started putting out Facebook events and LinkedIn events, and I believe a lot of you came to us through those today. So that's really good to know and really good feedback. So we'll be trying to push out our events via LinkedIn and Facebook again. End of slideshow. I'm just going to swap over to Laurie's computer.
Yeah, we had tech issues this morning, my fault.
So it's super cool because I've known Laurie for a number of years now. And she's sort of like, I don't know, I just look up to you so much. That's very kind. So I'd love to introduce Laurie Winkless, who is a science storyteller. And she's going to share a little bit about her. She's going to pick a path.
Yeah.
Something like that. I'll let you explain it.
Okay.
I'll sit down.
That's all good, thank you. I'm going to put a timer on, which I know is like very unprofessional, but I have a tendency to waffle. And you all have jobs, so yeah. Anyway, kia ora, no airani o kutipuna o kumātua a hauhoki. Kua marena au ki pētahi kiwi no wainui o mata. Kua whitu tau a hau e noho ana I Aotearoa. Ke te au kairani ka papakaina no Laurie Winkless a hau. Tēnā koutou. Morning everyone. My name is Laurie. Thanks very much for the invite to be here. I had to travel all the way from Pitaone across the harbour. But as you can probably tell at this point from my accent and maybe my mihi, I'm originally from Ireland. I was super inspired by the theme this month. Christine did say that I didn't have to follow it if I didn't want to, but I thought I would. And I don't often get an opportunity to give a themed talk. Usually it's a science event, so I'm giving quite a formal lecture. And I also don't often get to speak to a room full of really interesting creatives. So I thought that gave me a perfectly valid excuse to play around with my usual presentation style. And so I did promise Christine that I would talk a little bit about my process, even though I feel like a dick for saying that. But I will do that. I'll talk about my process and the way that I like to find science stories. But I also wanted to tell you some interesting science stories. And I felt like 3 was a good number. However, I have a lot of stories that I could tell you, and I am terrible at making decisions. So I decided that you are going to help me to decide how we're going to do this. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, as Christine mentioned, the rest of my presentation is going to be a kind of choose your own adventure affair. So I'm going to show you, I've grouped the topics into the 3 main states of matter, because I am a nerd. So we've got solids, liquids and gases. And for each one of those, I'm going to show you a pair of images. Okay? Now, I'm not going to tell you anything about those images. You will recognize some of them. Some will be familiar, but others will not. And I'm not going to give you any clues about what those ones are. But I will say that these images are all patterns. And they are usually patterned surfaces. And that pattern itself has a scientific function, right? So the pattern plays a role in how that surface behaves in one of the 3 mediums that we're going to be talking about. And in each instance, I want you to choose one of the 2 images. And it's just based on visuals, right? Or maybe what you might be curious about. And then that's the pattern we're going to talk about in that section. So that's how we're going to cover 3 rather than the 6 that I have prepared. So, does that sound good?
Yeah.
All right. So, these are your first pair of images, and I'm just going to leave them there while I chat at you for a few moments. One of the things I really love to do in my own writing, and I think this is probably true for most science journalists, is to take something very kind of everyday or familiar, or some might say boring, and unveil something astonishing about it. Because to me, there's almost always something really interesting to say about the underlying science of any given object. And if I can change the way a person views that object, then I consider that a really meaningful interaction. I also live under this assumption that if there's a topic that I find fascinating, probably there'll be some other people who find it interesting too. And to be honest, it's an assumption that's served me pretty well so far in my career. So just to give you a random example, my most recent Forbes article was about concrete. Cement, actually, even duller than concrete. But when I last checked, 18,000 people had read that article. Right? So I'm like, I think it's interesting, and there's at least 18,000 other people who think it's interesting. And possibly the article that I've written in recent years that I'm most proud of was in North and South, which I love as a magazine, and it was about the sport curling. And since then, I've received so many emails about curling, and I love seeing them. And I've also been invited to give talks about winter sports. And I was invited on to Neil deGrasse Tyson's podcast, where we did an entire episode about ice. I know, right? And that's had like hundreds of thousands, but that's his celebrity star, not mine. But there is an audience for science, and it doesn't just include people who are already knowledgeable about science or interested in it. I think that you just need a curiosity about the world around you. So with that in mind, I want to take a show of hands for the image on the left, so the kind of brownishy image. Great. And then this dark grey image here on the right. Sorry, tired people. But you can ask me questions about it later. I love talking about rubber. So what you are looking at is the very, very zoomed in toe of a gecko. No. So if you're unfamiliar with geckos, I'm very sad for you. This is what one looks like. This is a tokay gecko. And as you can see, this gecko is sitting on climbing on a beautiful pink wall. And geckos are famous climbers. They are astonishingly good climbers. They can climb on any surface you can possibly think of. And that is because of their incredible feet. Now there is a lot of diversity in gecko feet, so this is just a small sample of what the underside of a gecko's foot might look like. Just as an FYI, the blue one, that's the tokay gecko. So the tokay gecko is quite a big gecko and has quite large feet. But you can see a huge range of diversity. But actually, all of these feet rely on the same underlying mechanism, so the same physics defines how these feet work. So these structures are basically the structures that we're looking at. Hold on, let's see. They're basically hairs, right? And as you can see, each individual hair is not pristine. It has a terrible, terrible case of split ends, right? So each one of these hairs, which we call setae, but we can just say hairs, they have hundreds or thousands of split ends, right? So they split into hundreds or thousands of little tips. And those tips are incredibly tiny. Now, when I say incredibly tiny, what I mean is that the tips of these split ends can be just a few atoms across, right? Incredibly tiny, and they're called spatulae when they're that size. I really mean, like, it's not a number, it's not a scale that we can think about, really. But this split ends, this incredibly small surface, allows gecko feet to make astonishingly intimate contact with any surface you can think of. And it taps into a very specific force that in physics we call van der Waals interaction. Apologies if anyone is now having a flashback to high school physics. What van der Waals interaction is effectively an attractive force, but it can only exist between atoms that are effectively touching. So it only exists when the electrons of one atom can feel the presence of the electrons of another atom. Okay? The magnitude, as you'd imagine, right, the size of this force, electron to electron, is unfathomably small for each one of these split ends. But then there are thousands of split ends on each one of these hairs, and then there's about 1 million of these hairs on the foot of each gecko. So geckos have 4 feet, and so they have about 4 million of these hairs. So when you have an unfathomably tiny force, and then you multiply it many times, you end up with more than enough force for a gecko to support its own body weight. And in fact, most geckos could probably support their own body weight with just a single toe. So just as a summary to that, geckos climb and stick onto things by tapping into atomic forces. So they use electron interactions to climb. And we often call this mechanism dry adhesion, because unlike sticky things that we think of, this type of adhesion doesn't require stickiness, right? It doesn't need any sort of gloopiness or any sort of residue or anything like that to actually attach onto a surface. And geckos aren't the only animals that can stick without stickiness. So there are some spider species and some beetle species as well that have this ability, but geckos are like definitely my favorite. Okay. We are on to Your next choice. So, again, I'm just going to talk at you for a few moments before you make your decision. I'm very often asked about why and how I possibly had an idea to write a book about friction, which I did. My second book, called Sticky, is about friction. And it was very much not a eureka moment. It was very much a slow burn over many, many years. So just as a bit of background, I used to work in a big research lab in the UK called the National Physical Laboratory. And while I was there, I was assigned to a project which looked into the use of patterned surfaces to manipulate and control friction and fluid flow. And that led me to do some research into water repellent surfaces, amongst other things. And then later, when I was writing my first book, which is all about cities and infrastructure, I kind of kept coming across these sorts of surface-related interactions. So, things like, why do leaves on a train line cause so many problems? That's a surface interaction. How do the tires that we use on our bikes and our cars, how do they grip onto the road? That's a surface interaction. And once I started seeing the world through stuff that happens on and between surfaces, I literally just couldn't let it go as an idea. I was like, I must do this. And convincing my publisher that this was an interesting enough topic to cover in a popular science book was a slightly arduous affair. But we got there. We got there in the end, and the book came out a couple of years ago now. And when writing Sticky, I gave myself lots of tasks. I had lots of aims for the book. So I did want to cover things that I was curious about, because there's no better excuse for asking people stupid questions than having to write about it. And that's my favourite thing to do. I also wanted to make sure that I included topics that would be relevant and thought-provoking to as wide a range of people as I could. I also wanted to look at things at different scales, so things that are very, very large and things that are very, very small, because I thought that would be a good challenge. And I wanted to include as many examples as I could from the natural world, where stickiness and slipperiness, like the gecko, has evolved rather than being designed. So these two images, they are both from the natural world. They operate at slightly different scales. They are both solids, but the way that they interact with liquids is what makes them interesting. So, which one are we going to talk about? The greenish image. Oh, it's going to be tight, I think. And the bluish image. Oh, no, it's not. Okay. We can talk about leaves over coffee. Does anyone have any idea what this is?
Butterfly wings?
Scales. That's a good guess.
Fish.
This is the skin of a gummy shark. And I don't mean the lolly, right? This is a species of shark that's mostly found in the southern seas of Australia. And I mean no disrespect when I say this, but the gummy shark is not a particularly magnificent or glamorous species of shark. It gets its name from the fact that it has these plate-like teeth, which make it look a bit so sweet. But this is his skin. And the skin of all shark species look a bit like this, and it is utterly incredible. You can see, right, that it's covered in things that look like scales. Right? It's covered in a pattern of really tiny chevron-shaped structures that we call denticles. Now that word gives you a little bit of a clue, because that word tells you that these structures are tooth-like. So they are made from outer coatings of dentine and enamel, so they're really tough and strong on the outside. And then on the inside they've got like a pulpy core, just like our own teeth. And the exact size and shape of denticles will vary within and between species of shark. And on any given animal, you'll very likely find different sizes and shapes of denticles on different parts of their body. So maybe you're painting a picture now of what the job of these tiny teeth are. They do likely perform multiple functions. There is some research that suggests that they kind of act as a form of armor plating, maybe. But the most interesting function, in my humble opinion, is that dermal denticles actually manipulate the way that water flows around the body of a shark. Actively manipulate it. So can you see that they're all kind of oriented in the same direction? So what that tells you is that the top of this image is the front of the shark, and the bottom of this image is towards the back of the shark. Okay, so the water flow when the shark swims moves in this direction. So I will say that shark researchers have repeatedly shown that denticles reduce drag. So they reduce the resistance that a shark experiences as it swims through the water. So their presence effectively makes a shark more slippery than if the shark had smooth skin. Okay? More than that though, and this is very recent research, but there is some evidence to suggest that as well as making the shark more slippery, the shape of these structures actually causes a vortex, so a little packet of turbulent water, to build up at the front of each denticle. And that is a low pressure region. So what that effectively means is that the shark is kind of sucked forwards, right? So it's not only slippery, but it is also kind of sucked forward through the water. So this allows sharks to reach absolutely crazy speeds. So this is a short fin mako shark. This is the fastest shark species in the world. And it can reach 74 kilometers an hour.
Terrifying.
So you're not going to outswim it, that's for sure. But this is too fast if we were just looking at the physiology of the shark, right? If we were just looking at its muscles and its aerodynamic design, it still goes faster than that. So these denticles are doing something really, really special. So now just to close out this slide, some of you may remember or you may have heard about these shark-inspired swimsuits. So these were all the rage at the elite levels of swimming in the 2000s. Now I hate to break this to you, it probably won't surprise you, but despite what all the marketing imagery would suggest, and annoyingly there used to be an image that showed a shark above it, disappeared from the internet. These suits had absolutely nothing in common with shark skin whatsoever. You can see these little things here? They're like, wow, they're like shark skin. No. So they did actually make swimmers faster, but it had nothing to do with the fabric. It made them faster because the suit was designed to support their core muscle groups. So they were really good at supporting you, keeping you flat in the water. And they made you more streamlined because instead of skin, you had a smooth surface. But they also probably provided a level of buoyancy, which made them banned about 10 years ago. Okay, so I'm running so late. I knew this would happen. Hopefully not too much. Okay, so now we are on to our third and final class of matter, gas. Before we jump into choosing one of these images, I just wanted to touch on something that is really particularly important to me as a writer, and it is really a central part of the way that I work, especially when I'm writing like an article or a book chapter, or even thinking about scripts for podcasts or radio segments. I often say that because I'm Irish, I love to chat. Now I kind of say it in a disparaging way, but it's true, right? Irish culture is heavily reliant on conversation and storytelling. That is just part of our DNA. And I do think that on some level, it's one of the reasons I enjoy interviewing people as much as I do. I love it. I cannot tell you how much I enjoy talking to someone about their work. When I'm doing my research, it doesn't matter the topic. It really doesn't matter the topic. If I can find the right interviewee, I feel like I'm golden. That's a central part of the way that I approach any topic. Because very often, I'm not the expert on the topic. But I want to make sure that what I'm talking about is reliable and accurate. I'm a scientist. So all of those things are important to me. And I love research papers. I love them. I love patents. I love technical reports of all kinds. I had 400 references in Sticky. However, you can get, and I certainly get, a much fuller picture of any research question if I actually speak to someone doing the work. I interviewed 60 people for Sticky. 43 of them went on to have quotes in the book, and in many cases those interviews made that chapter. So, without that person's voice, the story I was trying to tell would have felt incomplete at best and really lifeless at worst. And those interviews had an added benefit, which is that they've introduced me to people who have since become my friends. And actually, in one case, a collaborator, someone who I'm working with right now. Science is a process done by people. So I love to highlight the people doing it wherever I can, because I think we have a huge amount to learn from each other as long as we are open to it. Okay, you've had your chance. We're going to go on to your final choice, and I will just say that one of these images is relevant to a favourite interview that I got to do for the book, but I won't tell you which one. So what is your choice? This white image or this multicolored image? That's the closest one, that's surprising to me. Okay, I think, though, it's this one. Alright. You are looking at two T-38. These are jet aircraft that are simultaneously breaking the sound barrier.
Wow.
This is a real image. This is an actual image. The reason, it looks a bit weird is because the colour gradient has been altered so that we can see what's actually going on with the airflow. But here it is in black and white.
Wow.
It's one of my favourite pictures I've ever seen. Like, truly, truly.
So cool.
The patterns that you are seeing here, they are caused by abrupt changes in air density. So those big strong lines you can see, they are shock waves. You can also see things like the engine exhausts, and behind each aircraft you can see kind of ripples. In aerodynamics we call those wakes. And actually, let me flip back to this one. You see these little red packets. So they're coming off the edges of objects, so like the edges of wings. These are vortices. So these are those packets of turbulent, swirling air. And the technique that was used to create this image was actually invented in the 1800s. So it's called Schlieren photography, if you've never heard of it. And this image was taken by NASA in 2019. Okay, this is not a photo from the 1800s. But the technique is basically the same. It's gotten a bit more precise, a bit more reliable, but it uses a kind of an alignment of mirrors and lenses to capture changes in the refractive index of air. Another flashback to high school, here we go. So you might remember that the refractive index of a medium is a number, and it's a number that tells you how much a beam of light will be bent when it moves through that medium. Okay? So the refractive index for air is typically 1, because air doesn't really bend light, otherwise our eyes would be very poorly designed. But when an incredibly high-speed object, like a supersonic jet, is flying through the air molecules just cannot get out of the way quickly enough. So they end up kind of piling up on the front and on the edges of whatever that object is. And that makes the air especially dense in those areas, which changes the way that light travels through it. So this is completely invisible to our eyes, but Schlieren photography makes it visible. Now, humans broke the sound barrier for the first time in 1947, and it was done by a pilot called Chuck Yeager, who I'm obsessed with, in the Bell X-1. That was just 44 years after the first ever powered flight, the Wright brothers. So we went from having never flown to breaking the sound barrier in 44 years. And obviously building aircraft with the ability to do this took an astonishing amount of research and incredible engineering. But for me, without the ability to actually see what's happening to the air or the object moving through the air, we just would never have made that leap. And without that knowledge, we could never have found a way to escape the gravity of Earth and travel around the solar system. We can't do that unless we can travel supersonically. This incidentally was the source of one of my favourite interviews, so good choice.
Chose the right one.
So it was with Wing Commander Maz Jovanovic. So she is in the Royal Australian Air Force. This is Maz. She did her test pilot training and broke the sound barrier numerous times at Edwards Air Force Base in the US, which is exactly the same place that Chuck Yeager flew the Bell X-1 and broke the sound barrier. So with that, I am done. Thank you very much.
Not too bad. Not too bad. Thank you so much, Laurie. That was incredible. We usually have a little bit of time for questions, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Does anyone in the audience have a question for Laurie? Oh, there's hands. There's hands.
What's interesting about rubber?
Rubber. Okay. I've got the slide ready. So rubber is a viscoelastic material, right? And what that means is it's halfway between like a sticky viscous fluid like honey and a really bouncy solid like a spring, right? Because it sits in between those two regions, it means that when, like if you build a tire from rubber, as the tire's rolling along the ground, it kind of lingers in place. So it moves around every bump and crevice because it's so flexible. But because of this viscoelasticity, it kind of holds on a little bit longer. And that tiny fraction of a second is enough to generate the friction to hold the tire onto the road. And like, so if anyone's a Formula 1 fan, which I am, the big Formula 1 tires, they're called slicks. They also tap into another form of grip. So they use a thing called molecular adhesion, which is quite similar in some ways to van der Waals interaction. So those tires have been designed to make this a similar level of contact. So the rubber in a Formula 1 tire and the track on the Formula 1 track are touching by there's about 1 nanometer gap between them. So they have like an additional layer of grip that our bike tires and our car tires don't. Yeah. But rubber makes it possible. We didn't have that behavior, it wouldn't work.
What's the Velcro physics?
It's actually, in a way, it's kind of very normal. So it is just hooks that attach onto each other. That's all it is.
So some are very strongly, they can twist it very well.
That's true.
Some are not all that.
Yes. So generally you want one half of your Velcro to be stiff and strong, the hooks. And then the fluffy side of your Velcro should be as high, you need to have as high a roughness as possible. So really cheap Velcro has not enough hooks and not fluffy enough on one side. The really good stuff is a very, very high roughness on the fluffy side and really strong pliable hooks and lots of them on the other side. Yeah. No problem.
Laurie, a lot of your images were about nature.
Yeah.
And we know from nature it's an evolution and quite significantly just outstanding and amazing what can happen. In that evolution, and the swimsuit is like science is trying to replicate something to be as good or to perform. In your travels and in your writing and in your research, have you ever come across something that is so closely aligned, or has science ever been able to replicate something?
That's a good question. I won't open the slide. Okay. I'll look back in day. But the green image, so we have the shark image on the right and then we had like a leaf on the left, that's probably the closest I've seen. So that leaf is called a salvinia. It's a fern. It's a horrible plant. It's really invasive. It basically floats on water, so it can suffocate waterways. It's terrible. But scientifically, it's really, really cool because what it does is, some of you might have heard of the lotus effect. So these lotus leaves always stay dry because water forms this droplet on top of them. This salvinia plant has like an extra level of complication on it. So it has these hairs that are shaped like a whisk, so they break into 4 pieces. And the whole leaf is hydrophobic, so it repels water. But the very tip of each one of those hairs is hydrophilic, and it attracts water. So what that means is that water can't get down in between the leaves, in between the hairs, but it gets pinned in place on the top of the hairs. So you have this permanent layer of air that gets trapped under the water. So the researchers who discovered this effect are designing coatings for boats that use the same structure. Because if we can make those commercially viable, we can put them on shipping containers. 90% of world trade happens by sea. And it happens by shipping containers which use the dirtiest, most polluting, awful fuel you can imagine. So if we now have boats that don't get wet because they're sitting on a pocket of air, they can move through the water more easily. You have less drag, you have fewer pollutants. So that is the one that I'm really excited about. Yeah, because it's an exact replica of the Leaf. Yeah. Great question. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
I have a couple, so
Yeah.
if you made us choose, you can
I
choose
did,
your
I
own
know, so
question.
yeah.
I'll give you the question.
Yeah. Okay.
First one, what's something that you wish people would understand more about science storytelling? Number two, do you have any rituals or practices that get you into your creative/writing flow? And then I know I can Google this, but I like how you explain things. When you're talking about the geckos, how do goats just be? Like, get up now.
Thing I wish people understood about science communication is that it's not always about getting all of the details that you as a scientist might want to the general public's brain, because that's not actually what motivates them. You want to show people the role that science plays to them. And sometimes that means leaving out things that you would ordinarily like to include. But it's because no two audiences are the same, and I think that you should always think about your audience when you're communicating. So respect your audience enough to know what they care about. That's one big thing, and I don't see enough of that. The second one was around my rituals. Not really in the sense that I am an over-preparer. So when I'm interviewing someone, I like obsessively stalk them, like obsessively everything they've ever written. And so when I get to the point of where I feel prepared for the interview, when I feel like I already kind of have some of the answers to my questions, but then it means I know what I'm listening for. So that's one thing. Like I'm listening for something more than that, because I can get that from what they've already published. So that's one thing. And then goats. Goats are actually kind of similar to rubber. So they have a level. The inside of their hooves has a flexibility that you wouldn't expect from the outside. But it's mostly balance. It's mostly where their body weight. Yeah, it's mostly that, more to do with the surfaces. Yeah, it's all three, I think. So, any other questions? That's my website. My email address is on there, so feel free to contact me on the round. And thank you so much again for
Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you.
Very good. Laurie's website was designed by Studio C.
Yes. And my animated logo was also designed by Studio C.
Very cool. I work for Studio C. In case it was not clear. Thank you so much for coming, especially coming out on a very cold, longest night sort of morning. Our next event is July 26th, I think. And we've got Vanessa from Creative Capital Arts Trust coming along. I think you know Vanessa, don't you? I'm looking at Casey.
Oh.
Do you know Vanessa?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
So Vanessa is one of the head of the Fringe Festival, and one of the coordinators might be the lead on Cuba Dupa as well. So she's an incredible woman, and really excited for you to hear from her. So thank you again. I'll see you next time, and go have a good day.
Thank you.